In a small riverside town where life moved slowly, two boys grew up side by side, their paths seemingly tied together by fate. Michael and Daniel had been inseparable since childhood. They lived only 2 streets apart, went to the same school, and spent countless afternoons fishing by the old wooden pier, talking about everything and nothing. Michael was the dreamer. He had a sharp mind and a heart that burned with ambition. Even as a child, he spoke of leaving the town one day, of seeing cities filled with skyscrapers, of achieving something so big that everyone would remember his name. Daniel, on the other hand, was the steady one. He wasn't as ambitious, but he was dependable, loyal, and full of quiet strength. Where Michael dreamed, Daniel acted. Where Michael planned, Daniel supported. Their bond was admired by everyone in town. Teachers noticed how Daniel always shared his notes with Michael, even when Michael had been too distracted with grand ideas to study. Neighbors smiled when they saw them carrying fishing rods together, laughing as though the world belonged only to them. To the casual observer, theirs was the kind of friendship that would last forever. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. As teenagers, their differences became more pronounced. Michael excelled in academics, winning competitions and gaining recognition beyond the borders of their small community. He loved the attention, the applause, the way teachers and townsfolk called him gifted. Daniel was proud of his friend, yet a part of him quietly wondered why he always had to play the supporting role. He worked hard too, but he was never noticed. While Michael was praised for brilliance, Daniel was thanked for being helpful. One evening, as they sat by the river watching the sun dip below the horizon, Michael spoke with excitement. "Danny, one day, I'll leave this place. I'll study in the best universities, meet the most important people, and build a life far away from here. And when I do, I'll bring you with me. We'll both rise together." Daniel smiled, but something inside him twisted. He wanted to believe Michael's words, but he couldn't ignore the doubt creeping in. What if Michael leaves and forgets me? What if I'm left behind, just a shadow in his story? That thought planted a seed that would grow with time. Years passed, and Michael's prophecy began to unfold. He received a scholarship to a prestigious university in the city. Daniel, who struggled academically despite his hard work, stayed behind and took a job at his uncle's hardware store. The night before Michael left, they sat again by the river, the same spot where so many promises had been made. "Don't worry," Michael said, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. One day you'll be standing right beside me, and we'll laugh about how small this town was." Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, one day." But as Michael's bus disappeared into the distance the next morning, Daniel felt a hollowness he couldn't shake. He had always been the friend in the background, the one who clapped the loudest when Michael succeeded. Now, left alone in a quiet town, he wondered if that would ever change. Meanwhile, life in the city transformed Michael. At first, he called Daniel often, sharing stories about new classes, professors, and the challenges he faced. Daniel listened, always supportive, though he felt a sting each time Michael spoke about new friends. Over time, the calls grew shorter, then less frequent. Eventually, weeks passed without a word. Daniel tried to be understanding. After all, Michael was busy chasing his dreams. Still, loneliness gnawed at him. While Michael attended parties, networking events, and built connections, Daniel's days were filled with stocking shelves, carrying boxes, and helping customers find nails or paintbrushes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Yet, every time he looked in the mirror, he saw not himself, but the reflection of someone who had been left behind. 1 year later, Michael returned to town during the holidays. The whole community gathered to welcome back their star. People praised him endlessly. How mature he looked, how well he spoke, how bright his future seemed. Daniel stood quietly in the corner, clapping along with everyone else, but his heart was heavy. Later that night, they walked together through the empty streets, just like old times. Michael spoke passionately about the city, about the opportunities, the people, the excitement of it all. Then, almost casually, he said, "You know, Danny, sometimes I feel like this town is a prison. People here, they don't think big. They're satisfied with too little. I can't imagine staying here my whole life." Daniel stopped walking. His chest tightened. "My whole life is here, Michael. My family, my work, everything." Michael shrugged. "I didn't mean it like that. I don't want you stuck here forever. You deserve more, don't you? Daniel didn't respond. He stared at his friend, realizing how wide the gap between them had grown. Michael had wings now, soaring higher with each passing year, while Daniel's feet were firmly on the ground. And though Michael still called him best friend, Daniel couldn't ignore the gnawing voice inside whispering. To him, you're just a part of his past, not his future. That night, Daniel lay awake, replaying their conversation. Admiration and bitterness tangled inside him. He loved Michael, but he also envied him. More importantly, he feared losing him completely in the years that followed. That fear began to shape Daniel's choices. When Michael invited him to the city for a weekend, Daniel declined, claiming he was too busy with work. When Michael offered to help him apply for courses or jobs in the city, Daniel hesitated, always finding excuses. Deep down, he wasn't afraid of failing. He was afraid of standing in Michael's shadow forever. Instead of drawing closer, Daniel began to distance himself, telling himself that he was building his own path, independent of Michael. But resentment grew in silence, and unspoken feelings have a way of festering. By the time they were both in their mid-20s, Michael had become a rising star in a corporate firm. He visited home less and less, his world now filled with polished offices, business suits, and big deals. Daniel, meanwhile, managed to buy the hardware store from his uncle, turning it into a modest but stable business. From the outside, both seemed successful in their own ways. But inside Daniel's heart, a storm brewed. He told himself he didn't need Michael anymore. Yet, every time he heard townsfolk speak of Michael's achievements, he felt like he was drowning in someone else's glory. He was no longer the loyal friend by Michael's side. He was just the forgotten one left behind. And so, a bond that had once seemed unbreakable began to crack. Neither of them knew it yet, but the choices they were about to make would test not only their friendship, but the very core of who they were as human beings. The days that followed felt endless for Laura. The house seemed to breathe in a rhythm she no longer recognized, and every corner carried the echo of something broken. Morning sunlight fell across the dining table where the three of them once sat together, but now meals were taken separately, like unspoken treaties that each of them signed with silence. Laura often ate quickly and left for her room, unwilling to linger in the tension that pressed on her chest. Her father, Daniel, tried to hold things together in his quiet way. He maintained routines, fixing small things around the house, driving her to school when her mother was busy, asking about her classes even when she responded with half answers. He moved like a man walking on glass, every step careful not to cut too deeply into wounds he couldn't heal. Laura noticed how his hands shook sometimes when he held his coffee cup, how his eyes lingered on the door when Evelyn came home late. He rarely raised his voice, but the quiet carried its own weight, heavier than shouting. Evelyn, on the other hand, grew more distant by the day. She spent long hours outside, claiming errands, work meetings, or obligations that never seemed to end. When she was home, she busied herself with chores that didn't need doing, polishing the same surface twice, folding laundry that was already folded. Her phone was always near, screen lighting up with unseen conversations. Laura caught fragments of hushed tones and soft smiles meant for someone else. Each moment added another crack in Laura's trust, another stone in the wall she was building inside herself. One Friday evening, Daniel suggested they have dinner together at their favorite restaurant, the little Italian place where Laura used to twirl pasta with clumsy enthusiasm as a child. Evelyn hesitated, then agreed, perhaps out of guilt. The dinner was filled with forced politeness, Daniel asking about Laura's studies, Evelyn complimenting the food as though trying to fill the space with safe words. Laura sat between them, feeling like a referee in a game with no winners. She excused herself to the restroom halfway through, gripping the sink and staring into the mirror. Her reflection seemed older, heavier, as though the weight of secrets had etched lines across her young face. She whispered to her own eyes, "I don't want to be part of this." The following week, the cracks widened. One afternoon, Laura returned home early and heard her parents arguing in the living room. Their voices weren't muffled this time. They were raw, sharp, impossible to ignore. Evelyn's words cut like knives. "I can't keep pretending, Daniel. We're not the same people anymore." His reply was desperate, almost pleading. "We could try. For Laura, for us." Evelyn's response was colder than ice. "Sometimes trying isn't enough." Laura froze in the hallway, her hands trembling, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She wanted to burst in and scream at them to stop, to remind them she was still there, still listening, still breaking. But she stayed rooted to the floor, her breath shallow, her world collapsing inch by inch. Later that night, Daniel knocked gently on her door. "Laura, can I come in?" She hesitated before saying yes. He stepped inside, looking older than she'd ever seen him. He sat on the edge of her bed, shoulders slumped, eyes clouded. "I know this isn't fair to you," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have to carry this weight. But I need you to know, no matter what happens between your mother and me, I'll always be here for you." His voice cracked at the end, and for a moment he wasn't her strong, unshakable father. He was just a man afraid of losing everything. Laura felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted to ask him why love failed, why promises broke, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she leaned against him, and for a brief moment the world stopped shaking, but the reprieve didn't last. A few days later, Laura discovered the truth she had dreaded. She walked into the living room unexpectedly and found Evelyn on the phone again. The tenderness in her mother's voice was unmistakable. "I miss you too," Evelyn whispered, and when she turned, she saw Laura standing there, eyes wide with betrayal. Silence stretched like a chasm before Laura spoke, her voice trembling with fury. "How could you?" Evelyn stammered, searching for excuses, but Laura's words poured out in a rush. "You're breaking him. And you're breaking me too. Do you even care what this is doing to us?" Her voice cracked, tears spilling freely now. Evelyn reached for her, but Laura pulled back, shaking her head violently. "Don't. Just don't." She grabbed her bag and fled the house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frame. She ran until her lungs burned, ending up at the old park where her childhood memories lingered. The swings creaked in the wind. The slide gleamed faintly under the fading sun. She sat on the swing, clutching the chains so tightly her knuckles turned white. Questions spiraled through her mind. Was love always doomed? Were parents just people destined to fail? Was she foolish to believe in forever? The anger inside her mixed with sorrow until she felt hollowed. It was Daniel who found her, his figure appearing slowly along the path. He didn't scold her or demand explanations. He simply sat on the swing beside her, the chains squealing under his weight. For a while, they swung in silence, their shadows stretching across the playground. Finally, he spoke. "I used to bring you here when you were little. You'd beg me to push you higher, and I'd be terrified you'd fly right out of my reach." Laura gave a broken laugh, tears blurring her vision. "Maybe I should have." Daniel looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes, but he nodded gently. "Maybe, but you stayed, and that means something even now." He reached out and took her hand, rough and warm. "People fail, Laura. Parents fail. But love isn't just about the moments we get right. It's about what survives when everything else falls apart." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull her hand away either. For the first time in weeks, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was fragile, yes, but it carried a spark of hope. A reminder that even in brokenness, love could still exist in the spaces between. That night, as Laura lay in bed, she replayed the day's events over and over. The sound of her mother's voice, the look in her father's eyes, the grip of his hand on hers. She didn't know what the future held, whether her parents would heal or separate, whether their home would ever feel whole again. But she knew one thing with certainty. She would not let their mistakes define her. She would carry the lesson forward. That family was fragile, love was complicated. And sometimes the strongest thing you could do was hold on to the fragments that remained. The days ahead were uncertain, filled with conversations yet to be had, decisions yet to be made. But Laura no longer felt invisible in the chaos. She had found her voice, even if it trembled, and she vowed to use it, to demand honesty, to honor her own worth. Whatever storms awaited, she would face them with eyes wide open, heart scarred but still beating, and the knowledge that even shattered love could teach unbreakable truths. The weeks that followed Laura's confrontation felt like walking through fog. Each day carried the residue of that one shattering afternoon, the echo of her mother's whispered words, the emptiness of her father's worried silence. Home no longer felt like a sanctuary. It was a place of suspended trust, where every glance and every word seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Daniel threw himself into work at the hardware store, his movements precise but mechanical. The store was thriving, yet the success brought little joy. Every sale, every small accomplishment was tinged with the awareness that his personal life was crumbling. He avoided Evelyn when he could, yet he couldn't ignore her presence entirely. She moved through the house with the grace of someone pretending to belong while knowing she had already crossed invisible boundaries. Each time their eyes met, tension flared, and Daniel realized that words alone were insufficient. He was angry, hurt, but mostly uncertain how to rebuild what had been broken. Laura, meanwhile, navigated her own storm. At school, she carried herself with a cautious strength, masking pain behind carefully chosen words and a composed exterior. Friends noticed her quiet intensity, the way she listened more than she spoke, yet none knew the depth of the fracture at home. She spent hours in the library, immersing herself in stories where betrayal could be confronted and resolved on paper, even if real life offered no such comfort. At night, she would replay the day's events, questioning not just her mother but the fragile nature of love itself. The tension came to a head one rainy evening. Daniel returned home from the store to find Laura sitting in the living room, drenched from the sudden downpour, eyes red from crying. Evelyn was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and intimate, words that should not exist in a family space. Daniel felt a sudden, sharp spike of anger. He had tried patience, tried to maintain calm, but seeing the two worlds collide, the daughter he was trying to protect and the woman he had once trusted, was too much. "Laura, go to your room," Daniel said firmly, his voice tight. "Now." She hesitated, looking at him as though trying to read his thoughts. Then, without a word, she rose and retreated, leaving Daniel frozen in a liminal space between fury and despair. He wanted to shout, to demand explanations, to rip the truth from Evelyn's lips. But when he turned toward her, all he saw was guilt flickering across her face, and the sight twisted something inside him. Rage collided with sorrow, and he realized that punishment alone could not mend the fissure that had opened in their lives. That night, Laura refused to sleep. She lay awake, listening to the rain and the muffled sounds of her parents moving through the house, fragments of conversations floating through walls like ghostly echoes. Every creak of floorboard reminded her of promises broken, of the trust that had dissolved. She wanted to speak, to confront, but words seemed insufficient, inadequate in the face of betrayal so deep it reverberated through her chest. Days passed, and a fragile routine emerged, one built on avoidance rather than reconciliation. Meals were silent, laughter absent, glances careful. Yet beneath the surface, an unspoken reckoning was forming. Each family member knew that avoidance could not last forever. The heart seeks resolution, even when the mind is unready. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. Daniel found Laura in the park again, her favorite bench under the old oak tree, notebook in hand, scribbling furiously. He approached quietly, unsure if he was welcomed. "Can I sit?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Laura didn't look up. "If you want." He sat, hands clasped tightly. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if anything can be fixed." Laura's pen paused, then continued moving. "Fixing isn't always the point," she said. "Sometimes it's surviving. Sometimes it's learning who you are when the people you trust most disappoint you." Daniel nodded slowly. "And do you think we can survive this?" She finally met his eyes, the depth of hurt mirrored there. "I don't know, but I want to try." That moment became a fragile bridge. They began to speak more openly, about the betrayal, about anger, about grief. Laura's voice was trembling, Daniel's cautious, but together they began to chart a path through the wreckage. Trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned, step by painstaking step. Meanwhile, Evelyn realized the gravity of her choices. She tried to approach Laura, to explain, to apologize, but found her daughter's walls difficult to breach. Each conversation ended in frustration, tears, or silence. Evelyn confronted Daniel one night in the kitchen, a rare moment alone. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her eyes rimmed with red. I thought I could balance everything, keep the life we had and the other part of me." Her hands trembled over the counter. "But I see now how much I've hurt all of you." Daniel, exhausted and raw, could only shake his head. It's not just about hurt. It's about trust. You broke it. And now we have to decide if we can even rebuild anything from the pieces. Evelyn looked away, realizing the truth in his words. She was not the victim in this story. She was the architect of the fracture, understanding that was painful but necessary. For the first time, she considered what it truly meant to be responsible, not just for herself, but for the family she had endangered. Weeks turned into months, and the slow, deliberate work of healing began. Daniel and Laura learned to lean on each other without resentment poisoning the bond. Evelyn sought therapy, both for herself and to rebuild the broken lines of communication. Family dinners returned, tentative and uneven at first, but gradually gaining warmth. Apologies were exchanged, tears shed, yet forgiveness was not assumed. It was earned in quiet gestures. Small acts of consideration and consistent presence. Laura grew stronger, shaped by the storm she had endured. She spoke openly in school about resilience, about learning from betrayal, about the complexity of human relationships. Her voice, once hesitant and fearful, became steady and clear. She realized that life was not about perfection or unbroken hearts. It was about navigating the turbulence with courage and awareness. By the end of the year, a fragile equilibrium had been established. The family was not untouched, nor were the wounds forgotten, but they had learned that survival, understanding, and genuine effort could create a new kind of closeness. Daniel, once the quiet observer, became the anchor of stability. Evelyn, humbled by her mistakes, embraced vulnerability. Laura, having faced the harshest lessons early, carried a quiet confidence, a knowledge that love could endure even when flawed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Laura sat on the porch with Daniel. Evelyn nearby, arranging flowers on the table. The air was warm, scented with rain-soaked earth. Silence settled comfortably around them, not heavy, but familiar and reassuring. Laura turned to Daniel. "We made it," she said softly. Daniel smiled, a mixture of relief and pride. "Not because it was easy," he replied. "Because we didn't give up." Evelyn watched them, a small, tentative smile forming. "And that's the best any of us can do," she whispered, almost to herself. The night embraced them with quiet acceptance, a promise that while life could still hurt, it could also heal. The fractures remained, subtle but visible, like cracks in a stone through which light could pass. And for the first time in a long while, Laura felt a fragile hope, proof that even amid betrayal, love and trust could be rebuilt, carefully, intentionally, and with unwavering courage.